Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Senior Vice President of GDR USA and GDR Creative Intelligence, James Mullen.
Okay, good morning. Morning, everyone. I'm painfully conscious, having been to a lot of these conferences that down the years, that the early morning plenary on the final day is a bit of a graveyard shift because, let's face it, about 55 to 60% of you are probably nursing a hangover. I heard a few of them on the way in, people talking about this. And so typically, it's incumbent on the speaker, in this case me, to try and G you up a bit with some kind of engaging way of bringing you back on side. In the past, I've been to conferences. I was at one in Singapore last year where they had like a dance troupe who got you all out of your seats, pumping, almost like a kind of fitness video. I'm not going to do that, don't worry. I was also at a conference in London a few years back where they had a guy with a guitar who's basically led a group sing-along to Britney Spears or something equally ghastly. But I haven't brought the guitar, so we're not going to have a kumbaya moment, I'm afraid. So I was trying to think, what's the best way to get you guys all back on side? Dan had you all standing up. But I was then kind of reminded of some data. If my clicker's going to work. Oh, no. There we go. Some data from Bank of America that you can hopefully see on the big screen here. And this data is analyzing the relationship that we all have with other people in our lives and our smartphones. The red line is everybody in the US. The blue line is millennials specifically. And as you'll see, millennials now interact with their smartphone considerably more than their significant other, their parents, their friends, their children, their co-workers. Which at first glance looks pretty depressing, frankly. We're all familiar with this story. You sit in a restaurant, people are Instagramming and Snapchatting, etc. This is what Snapchat realized, of course. The point is, though, that actually at first glance this looks depressing, as I say, but actually what's really going on here is actually that the way these people, young people, millennials, communicate with other people in their lives is through their smartphone. This is increasingly the prism through which they view their lives and communicate with other people. And so, like I say, that's what Snapchat realized. Evan Spiegel is married to a supermodel and worth billions of dollars, and he's under 30 for that very reason. Very annoying, but he realized that, of course, people were chatting when they were taking pictures all the time. They weren't preserving those images, they were communicating. So this morning, just to wake us all up, I want us all to pretend like we're millennials. Very few of us actually are, I guess. But what we're going to do is we're going to pull out our smartphones. I know you all have them with you. When do you ever not? So grab your smart device, whatever that is, pull it out right now. And I want you to go to your web browser, whatever that is, Firefox, Chrome, whatever it is, Safari, whatever's the default on your phone, and go to slido.com, slido.com, where you'll get asked to enter a code, a bit like here. And the code I want you to enter is Texas Hold'em. I wasn't feeling very creative. We're in Texas, and it's a Protect conference, Texas Hold'em. You can write it however you like. I think uppercase, lowercase doesn't matter, but no apostrophe, as it's written there, Texas Hold'em. So are you all doing this? Okay, I'm going to do it as well. Right, now what that will give you is access to two tabs. One says questions and one says polls. I want you to click on the polls tab, which right now will be vacant. There'll be nothing there. But in a second, I'm going to populate this with a few questions that you guys are going to answer. And if the technology works, fingers crossed, we'll see this live on the screen in a second. So let's kick this off just to test that we've all got the hang of this. Slido.com, Texas Hold'em, that's your code. The first question is the one that we've all worried about for a long, long time. It's about time we put this to bed for once and for all. Who is the most popular Ryan at this conference in terms of celebrities? Is it Ryan Reynolds? Is it Ryan Gosling? Or is it Ryan Seacrest? So this is obviously very important that we get this one right. So I'm going to test this now. So if this works, you should now all be able to vote in your mobile phones. So here we go. We're off. 48 votes already. Ryan Reynolds, the runaway winner here. I should say this vote is entirely anonymous. So if you vote for Ryan Seacrest, no one will ever know. He's had a few votes. Actually, Ryan Gosling's doing surprisingly badly, but Ryan Reynolds is a runaway winner. Okay, cool. Okay, we've got the hang of this. So, Very quickly, who I am. I work for a trends and strategy agency that's based out of London, and we work with lots of brands all over the world. I look after the US team, so I live in New York and work with clients like these. We have about 40 on a kind of retained type basis, and our bread and butter is retail. So I know some of you in the room aren't retailers, but this is a retail conference. I'm going to be looking at innovation today through the lens of retail, looking at loss prevention through, obviously, the lens of retail principally. What we typically do for these types of clients is take them along, looking at trends, help them unpack strategies, and then eventually help them decide what to do across all their consumer-facing insights. That's enough about me. I want us now to think about this retail lens and think about some more questions that we can just sort of see if we have consensus on this. So the first question I want to ask you, and again, this is anonymous, so I want you to be honest. You're at the ATM, and you request $20 from a major US bank. What the type of bank has got loads of money? And it gives you $40 by mistake. What do? Do you wait for the bank to open, knock on the door, return the $20 they've overpaid you? Do you pocket it, or do you donate it to charity or to a homeless person in the street? Let's see what you think. So you can now vote. Oh, wow, you're a lot more honest than I was expecting. 64% of you would give it back. Well, I'm not sure I believe you, but good for you. Okay, 64% would return it, 27% would pocket it, and 10% would donate it. Okay. Let's just take this a little bit further, and I suspect this will be even worse then. In the store itself, you're talking to a checkout person who, let's be honest, is a bit ditzy, a little bit distracted. And when you're supposed to get $20 change back from this human being who's very nice and very likable, they give you $40. What do you do in this case? Do you return it to her and point out her mistake or his mistake? Do you pocket it, or do you donate it? You can now vote. Okay, pretty overwhelmingly in that case, with a human being, you're going to return it. There's still a couple of naughty people who'd pinch it. Fair enough. And the final one, just to sort of sit somewhere in the middle of this, I want to play with, is the idea of a self-checkout machine. An autonomous robot, an inanimate object that, by mistake, in this case, is at a rival retailer, a retailer that is either rival to the one you work at or one that you particularly like, and they give you $40 instead of $20. In this case, what do? Do you, again, report it to the manager and give them back the $20, pocket it, donate it, etc.? So, here's your final chance to vote. Okay, a few more of you are admitting to actually stealing this one. Fair enough. Why not? 3% donate it. I thought I'd given you a get out when I said donate. That's what I thought you'd all go for, as a sort of less of the two evils. But most of you are pretty honest here. You report it or return it in most cases. Okay, well, that's interesting. Because if we look at some actual data, there's been actually some quite robust studies on this exact thing. This is Queensland, where they did some research in Australia, I believe, exclusively, about how much people were prepared to steal from an ATM versus a self-checkout machine versus a human. And as you can see, for some reason, the scale was 1 to 7. You were more likely to steal from an ATM than a human. We did see that in the results you just gave as well, albeit that you, in most cases, are honest all the time. In actual fact, here, this evidence suggests that you're 18% more likely to thieve from an inanimate object, an ATM, versus a direct, living, breathing human being. In the UK, where I'm from, you may or may not have guessed, they did a really robust study of 1 million transactions across lots of different types of retailers to see how much people were, again, prepared to thieve. And effectively, British people are 2.5 times, in fact, more than 2.5 times, more likely to thieve from a machine than a person, which I find weirdly comforting somehow. Anyway, these are the questions that I guess are the backdrop to a lot of the things that LP teams have to consider as part of a bigger business, as a part of a retailer, where in many cases, we know that in the rise of the Amazon world, where we all used to one-click checkout and really fast transactions online, waiting in line in a store isn't really something that we enjoy anymore. So in most cases, we quite value the idea of self-checkout machines. It's growing a lot faster in Europe than it is here, but it's starting to catch on. But on the other hand, you guys are tasked with ensuring we have increased store security and people aren't getting away with stealing things. And traditionally, those two things were seen as a bit of a trade-off. You'd have increased store security on one hand versus a better customer experience on the other. And the point of my presentation this morning, hopefully, is to try and demonstrate that these two things are no longer necessarily mutually exclusive. In actual fact, using the technology and the ideas of loss prevention, we can actually build a better experience as well as increasing store security. That's what I'm going to try and demonstrate in the next sort of 30 minutes. What I'm going to do is quickly talk about the big picture, which is the problem with innovation. And the spoiler is that it's bloody hard. That's basically the point. And all the retail teams or innovation teams, some of you may have a lab at your business. It's hard work innovating. Then we're going to look at how loss prevention teams have an advantage versus their colleagues in innovation teams. And then we're going to look specifically at some of the technologies that we can use to boost customer experience whilst increasing the store security that I'm talking about. So I'll get quite specific a bit later on. And then finally, the caveat to all of this will be a little bit of a warning about where we might be going. And actually not in the science fiction future, but in the very not too distant retail future, potentially even here in the USA. So that's what I'm going to finish with. And then hopefully Steve will come back and we'll have time for a couple of questions. So, trouble with innovation. It's hard. The elephant in every retail conference and every retail boardroom is, of course, Amazon. I don't need to tell you that. And Jeff Bezos makes quite an interesting point here about what he thinks real innovation looks like. He says real innovation isn't doing things you know are going to work. Real innovation means invention, and it means doing things that you don't know are going to work. That's what innovation is. It's doing something new that no one's ever done before. So it may not work. The problem with that, of course, is it comes with inherent risk. And we'll talk about this in a second, but retailers don't like risk, obviously. The other problem we have with Amazon is just how much they're investing in this innovation, in these risk-taking maneuvers, in this invention that they have. They spent $23 billion last year, 2017, on research and development. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a staggering amount of money. It's more than the GDP of Cyprus, and it's more than the GDP of Afghanistan. Two countries that strangely look very similar in silhouette. I'm not sure that was really relevant. They also spent 40% more in 2017 than they did in 2016 on research and development. They are throwing money at this big time. But the problem is, like I said, retailers generally don't like risk. We're the bunters in a baseball game who are just trying to scrabble to get to the next base. That's the best way we keep going. We try and move forward. Of course, we keep trying to move forward. But rather than taking a huge swing, aiming for a home run and missing and looking a bit stupid, we'd rather just keep ticking over, keep bunting away, moving our business forward as much as we can. And for years, this has kind of worked. But the reality is now, I don't think this will work in the future for a couple of reasons. The first is the Amazon problem. Amazon is kind of eating everybody's lunch to a certain extent, and more transactions are moving into their ecosystems. And we'll talk a little bit about China later as well and how they're doing it with things like Alipay and Alibaba. So that's one end of the spectrum. And the other problem is that by doing this just a little bit better every time, incremental improvements, fundamentally all the retailers actually end up kind of contracting into the same place. It's kind of table stakes rather than real innovation. You're not moving your business forward to somewhere new. And the problem with that is if you contract to the same position, you end up in this kind of vanilla middle that many, many retailers in the USA find themselves in. And for years, that middle was okay because we had a huge middle class that were happy to spend all their money at TGI Fridays and Sears and Toys R Us. That necessarily has changed. And it's not just me saying that. There's some really significant numbers to back this up. The percentage of household aggregate income that sat in what we call the middle income bracket in 1970 was 62% of US houses. You fast forward to 2014, and it's just 43%. And this is obviously 4 years old as well, this data, so it will probably be even worse. The growth, most of it, is at the top end. All these Silicon Valley guys who are earning lots of money and all the hedge fund managers. There is also growth at the bottom, but it doesn't necessarily affect the household income too much, but there's more jobs at the bottom as well. So what we're seeing, I'll just show you that again because I think it's pretty powerful, is this switch from 1970 to now, just how much this middle bracket has shrunk. It's quite astonishing. And so what we're left with is some research by Deloitte that you may have seen quite recently, is the 5-year projections for retail in the US are basically a barbell. There's a kind of two ends of the spectrum. The middle, what they call balanced here, is looking at very, very limited growth. Very, very limited growth indeed. Most of the growth is either going to be at the value end of the spectrum, which is dominated by players such as Dollar General. In the UK, it's Aldi and Lidl and Iceland and people like that. Dollar General, some incredible numbers. There are now more Dollar Generals in the US than there are McDonald's, which is astonishing when you think about that. And Bank of America tracks the top 33 retailers in the US over a long period of time. And since 2008, net store openings of those 33 retailers, 76% of those have been Dollar General stores. It's astonishing. So that's the bottom end of the spectrum. The other end is what they call Premier. Premier doesn't mean premium, doesn't mean luxury, although luxury is doing relatively well. What Premier means is highly differentiated, something you can't get anywhere else, which is why I'm seeing this sort of problem that a lot of the department stores are having, because they're not significantly differentiated in many cases. And brands are often opening up their own stores. Direct-to-consumer brands are also opening up their own stores. They're going to physical retail as well. The problem is, to differentiate, you need to innovate. You need to be different. You need to have invention to do something that you can't get everywhere else. And so this is why innovation is more important than potentially feasibly it's ever been. And yet, the conundrum is, it's harder and harder to justify the money to do it because it's so risky. So anyone who here works in an innovation team, I suspect they're not here, but they will tell you this is hard going. They're trying to win investment for a business case to invest in new technology for innovation at your stores, and they just can't get it over the line because the return on investment isn't guaranteed. And like I say, retailers hate risk. And this is why I think loss prevention can potentially come to the rescue to a certain extent. Because fundamentally, your business cases are relatively easy to understand. You try and reduce shrinkage. You try and reduce costs. You save money. And it's quite straightforward for a CFO, a CEO, and the board to understand that where they spend money with you, they can see a return. So you guys are your profit and loss is your bread and butter. The loss is in the title of what your teams do. So you guys get this. This is your bread and butter. And so retailers, boards understand how you guys can benefit them. So you guys are probably quite good at getting the investment for improving your part of the business. Increasingly, that involves, of course, technology. And the reason I talk about technology is because fundamentally, when we get back to innovation in a second, technology and innovation are effectively indistinguishable now. But of course, in loss prevention, we know about security cameras, security gates, tags, all the kind of things that you're all very familiar with that have been bread and butter for us over the last probably 15, 20 years as technology's improved. But be honest for a second here. Who here, just a raise of hands, who here works for a business where the technology part of the business is still referred to as IT? Put your hands up. Quite a few of you. That's fine. But let's be honest, when you think of IT, you think of the IT crowd, you think of potentially slightly nerdy people whose business is all about maintaining the status quo, keeping servers running, keeping payment systems working. They're not necessarily about driving a business forward. And I think that's a mistake, because where we're going to see growth in the future is investment in technology. We are looking at a tech-first future. If you didn't know that already, it should be pretty obvious from what we're seeing in big tech right now with so many of these companies that are dominating the FTSE. The problem is, again, this conundrum we have with retail, though, is that for innovation teams to invest in technology is difficult. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and there's risk involved. So what they do typically is invest in a few beta stores, test stores. I think John was mentioning that just now with Container Store, to test things, which is fine. I can understand why that happens. But typically, because it's only being invested in a few places, it doesn't get adopted because it's not rolled out everywhere. People can't be bothered to learn a new behavior when they're shopping if they don't think it's going to be rolled out everywhere. And then because it's not adopted, it isn't then rolled out everywhere. So you're in this vicious cycle where nothing really happens. We just keep bunting, we keep bunting, we keep bunting. And the looming problem we have potentially is that Amazon, who, like I said, are spending loads and loads of money on investing in new ideas and innovation, potentially they are more likely to learn the bread and butter stuff of retail than retail is to learn the secrets of big tech. So there's a real dangerous future that we're seeing where actually we could be usurped by the likes of Amazon. We already know they're trying. We've seen Amazon Books where they're learning retail for themselves, trying to understand what's going on. And of course, the acquisition of Whole Foods is because they thought it's just easier to acquire that expertise than to learn it. So I've said here, retail needs a new hero. And I don't think we want that hero to be Amazon, because suddenly we all live in an ecosystem where we're all beholden to this one big, huge trillion-dollar brand. And I think this is the point. Loss prevention can be the heroes that rescue this for retailers. And I'll explain why. Because the same technology that you guys use to, reduce shrinkage and everything else can actually be used for lots of other purposes now. Not only includes store security, but better customer experience. And because a lot of this technology is being paid for by you, or being justified by you, innovation teams can then start piggybacking on a lot of those existing technologies, security cameras and so on, we'll see it in a second, to try new things and be inventive without necessarily seeing all those major risks that we talked about before. And that might sound a bit annoying, because like, well, why are they going to be able to piggyback off us? But actually it's good news for all of us, because it now allows you guys, when you invest in new technology, to justify it to your boards as an infrastructure investment rather than a payoff investment. It doesn't have to justify itself straight away in terms of reduced shrinkage and all the rest of it. It can be part of this ecosystem that's about a better customer experience for everybody. I'm going to look at, there's lots of areas I could talk about, but I've only got limited time. So I'm going to touch on 3 spaces that I think we can see this quite clearly. The move to RFID, and particularly ultra-high frequency RFID. HD cameras being the plug-in for software that is actually now about real-time analytics. And finally, the way payments is changing. Paying with a card, changing to paying with a mobile, to eventually, potentially, facial recognition, paying with a face. So I'll run through these kind of quickly. You all know this better than I do. EAS, electronic asset security, all this stuff. The tags we used to see when we picked up clothes in the store. We've all had the experience of, arriving at a wedding, feeling quite smug that we're all ready to go. We haven't got a hangover, everything's great. Then you pull out your brand new shirt and it's got a tag on it. And then you spend the morning running around Guernsey trying to find somewhere who can take it off for you and doesn't think you're a thief. That's going to be a thing of the past very, very soon, because RFID, though nothing new, is now suddenly much more subtle and much cheaper to produce. So now an RFID chip looks like this. It can be woven into the fabric of a dress or a pair of shoes or a shirt, so that when you're at Topshop, for example, you can pick it up, take it to the counter. They literally use a piece of software, a scanner, just to turn off the software. They don't have to take the scanner out and you walk out. The benefits of that are that it obviously speeds up the process, it's smoother, it's less clunky, there's obviously less wastage in terms of all those tags. You also have this, because it's ultra-high frequency RFID, the welcome gates can be far less intrusive. Those great big things we used to see, they're much more subtle now. And there's also great learnings for the business as well, because when you pick up a shirt, take it to the fitting room, try it on, and then put it back because you don't want it, Topshop can track all of that movement, understand how you're looking at things, and then obviously there's lots of learnings to be had there as well. Macy's, which I believe is a sponsor here, they're actually one of our clients as well, they run, I think, a pretty robust test across 3 different states with women's shoes. RFID chipping all of their shoes to allow them to track where every individual piece of stock actually is. And there's a few benefits to doing this. The first was that they saw improved display compliance by 6%, because they could tell where everything should be. But I think the more interesting one is that they were able to then fulfill omnichannel a lot better. Because in the past, if I searched for a pair of shoes on Macy's.com at a particular store and said I wanted to click and collect, they could only accept that order if they had at least 3 in stock, because they couldn't be sure, because of it wasn't so precise. They wouldn't have 3. They might have 1 or 2 or none. Now, because they can track every single item, if there's just 1 in stock, they can say yes, it's available, you can buy it. And so they've seen in just 3 months, omnichannel requests, fulfillment requests improved by 6.1% as well. So these are quite significant numbers when you're talking about a retailer the size of Macy's. It's also moving into self-checkout as well. So MediaMarkt in Germany, they're one of our clients. They now allow you to scan, they're kind of like a Best Buy, scan your products using their smart device, and so that when you pay for it with your phone as well. And then the phone switches off the RFID chip so you can just walk out. You don't have to talk to a checkout person whatsoever. And considering you're talking about high-value technology items, that's quite astonishing, but they obviously tested it enough that they believe it works. It's happening at Macy's too, and this will roll out nationwide soon, where you scan it with your phone, you pay with your phone, and at the moment you have to show somebody quickly that you've paid for what you're taking out with you. But it's a much slicker process than lining up and getting up in queue for a checkout. At Zara, they're still using the clunky old tags, but again, they're now moving to a position where people are self-checking out themselves. Staff are being freed up to be much more like stylists, consultative. They're not just there to be functional, transactional, etc. This is all being enabled with things like RFID. It's also about recognition. So this kind of cute one on the left is a dog store in Finland, in Helsinki, called Musti, where you have a collar which has an RFID chip in it on your dog, so that when you arrive back at the pet store, it says, "Hey Noah, nice to see you. Hey James, the owner. We know the kind of dog you are. They know the kind of food you eat, etc." And it's sent to them on an iPad, so they can have a really nice conversation straight off the bat. At Ralph Lauren, you're probably familiar with this. You know, we've seen for years RFID chips being used at places like Burberry, but they can afford for a trench coat to invest several dollars per trench coat on expensive RFID chips. This has now changed. It's now much, much cheaper. So at Ralph Lauren, you take in your items in the fitting room, and they can give you style advice based on what you've brought in there, what else might go well with that pair of trousers or that jumper. And you can also, live from the fitting room, reorder other sizes and other colors from the fitting room without having to gather it all up and go back out to the shop floor. Someone will bring it to you. And this is all enabled through RFID. The same technology that is being used to reduce theft. So this is what I'm getting at. The final example in this first little section is an Israeli startup on the left called Wasteless, which RFID chips grocery bags, salads basically, at the point of being bagged, wherever they're bagged. And that allows them to track the exact date and time that fresh salad was bagged. So what that means is they've got dynamic pricing at the shelf that you can see here. It's e-ink. And as the salad gets older, they reduce the price. So that customers have full visibility of the decision they can make between spending more for a fresher item or spending a bit less and getting something that's almost past its sell-by date kind of thing. And this obviously means they improve their sales, they get a better connection, because customers have a better experience as well. But also, that same technology is also preventing people from thieving these things as well. At Level Shoes, it's kind of like the Macy's example, where they can track every individual piece of footwear, but in this case, they make that technology available to the customer. So the customer at Level Shoes is in Dubai. It's a huge store. It's sort of the size of 2 American football fields. You can track down an individual item, either using your smartphone or kiosks around the store to find a particular pair of shoes you're looking for. So again, improving the customer experience. HD cameras and real-time analytics. So we're seeing a lot of startups that are playing in this space where they are actually using your camera feed that's already existing, because increasingly it's high definition, and plugging in the software and the recognition software that allows them to identify the things people are picking up in the store. That's what's happening on the right with standard cognition. On the left, this is something from Bosch that is a little bit more low tech, but I think probably means it's probably more likely to be rolled out in the near future. You can now use your camera to identify, it's just very simple, smart technologies, where there's a line, and where, okay, there's a line here, this woman's unhappy, let's send a message to the store manager to open another checkout immediately. In the past, people were doing this, but of course they're not foolproof. This way you autonomize that, make it something that's taken out of their hands, it just tells them, get another checkout open, in you go. It can also be used in places like Best Buy. If the camera can see somebody in the high-value aisle, like a TV or a smart device, and then unattended by a sales associate, they can ping somebody and say, right, get over there, there's somebody looking at this really expensive Samsung TV. And recognition is going to be quite key going forward. I heard John talking before about facial recognition and all the rest of it. Quite an amusing anecdote that you may or may not have seen about a week ago, came out of England, was what's happening with this millennial craze for avocado toast. It came originally out of Australia. It's now big in the UK. I'm pretty sure it's big here as well. I live in New York, and we go to this place called Two Hands where everyone goes mad for the avocado toast. So what's happening in London is that they were realizing, wow, there's this incredible health trend going on. We're selling 300 million more carrots this year than we were 4 years ago, except they weren't. What they're actually doing was, you know, this is sort of very lowbrow crime. Millennials were realizing that their avocado they could run through as a carrot on the self-checkout machine, and because it was less per kilo, they could get their millennial toast at half the price. And in many cases, stores were selling more carrots than they actually stocked. So this was, I guess, kind of a red flag. But this is what this technology will eventually aim to solve. And of course, the one that we're all familiar with that's had a lot of press is Amazon Go, where you swipe your mobile device, in you go, you pick up your product, and off you go. In the future, this may well be you go in and it recognizes your face, pick up things, off you go. This is using sensors at the moment, but also camera feeds. What they've basically done here is challenge themselves to replicate the buy with one now click seamlessness that everyone loves online in a physical space. People demand seamlessness, quick transactions, and yet you guys are tasked with keeping security high. So this is the balance. This is the thing we have to think about. So Amazon, perhaps less well publicized, has this technology now available on the cloud to anybody. It's called Amazon Recognition, and it allows you to plug into their API and to use the technology using your camera feeds to track what things are. And they're pretty accurate. You can see here 99% accuracy. It can identify a person versus a rock. And the more recent iteration is about facial analysis. So you can start looking in your stores to identify if people look anxious or angry. And if they are, they can send a message to somebody to start fixing it. It's a little bit dubious, this. Some people aren't happy about it. You may have read that Orlando Police Department has now started using this technology themselves to identify criminals. And people are worried that we're getting to this Orwellian nightmare of 1984 where we're being tracked our every move. And some people have kicked up a bit of a fuss. But this is already happening. Orlando is now doing this. I know we have some sheriff departments who are actually part of this conference, I believe. And the final little space is this idea about payments. So, of course, paying with a card is relatively easy to be fraudulent, because I could steal your card, know your PIN number, or where there's contactless payment, just swipe your card for low purchases, and there's not much you can do about it. Of course, mobile is safer because you have to often use your thumbprint, and it's your mobile device that's locked. But of course, eventually it'll be face. In China, mobile here has been really driven by Starbucks. That's where most mobile payments are happening in the US. 10% of them are all at Starbucks. In China, though, we are seeing this absolutely explode. They had 40% more mobile payments in 2017 than they did in 2016. A massive $12.8 trillion was used through mobile devices. And what this is enabling is a whole bunch of startups that are trying some really interesting new things. One of those is on the left here, which is Bingo Box. Bingo Box is basically like Amazon Go, but a bit less sexy, basically. But the point about Amazon Go is right now there's one store with a couple of others planned. These guys already have hundreds of these all around China. They're basically kind of shipping containers that are basically walk-in vending machines. You use your mobile device to enter it, you use your mobile device to pay, as you can see here, and then they have image recognition that tracks as you walk out that you're carrying the things you say you've paid for. So this guy's being a naughty boy. He's trying to thieve a little thing of noodles. The sort of far-reaching iteration of this is Mobi, that we've shown before at the NRF Big Show, which got a lot of interest. This is still a concept because they don't have self-charging technology available yet in terms of the legislation. But the only thing holding this up is legislation. The technology already exists. This is a store that you order to you. You don't go to it using your mobile device.
Hello, Miranda. Welcome back.
Looks pretty crazy, but the technology is available. Facial recognition, we've seen this grow massively in China as well. KFC's rolled this out quite extensively, but it's now finding its way to the US. This isn't just some Far Eastern sort of vision that we don't think will make it here. We're starting to see a lot of these technologies moving west. Cali Burger in Pasadena now allows you to use your face as a form of recognition when you come back to bring up previous orders and to pay, as you'll see here.
Oh, look at that. My God, it's amazing.
I can put in all my kids' different orders, and then when I go back, just reorder.
And with the loyalty points, we save money and get free food.
Since the platform stores our information securely using the world's most powerful facial recognition system by NEC,
I don't have to worry about stalkers finding my face.
And where this will go eventually will be things like sports games. So the former CEO of Ticketmaster has launched this company called Rival, fairly provocatively, which is going to take on Ticketmaster by using your face as a form of recognition. So you can rock up to the Super Bowl, to a Beyonce concert, or to an Astros game next year, potentially just using your face as a form of recognition. You don't have to have your wallet or anything else. Because this is a lot harder to defraud than your card or even your mobile device. However, like I say, this comes with a bit of a caveat, because where is this leading us, you might ask? There's if everything's being tracked all the time and our face is suddenly something that is out there in the world being tracked everywhere, where are we going? And there is a potential fear that this is getting closer to that that Orwellian nightmare that I mentioned before from 1984. In China, this is Huangzhou. Someone might correct my pronunciation of that, but this is a city that is where Alibaba is from. And that's Alibaba's CEO, Jack Ma, who's kind of the Jeff Bezos of China. And he has basically managed to find permission to track every single citizen of this city. Obviously, their privacy laws are basically null. And so they can track every citizen of this city as they move around doing their business. And they're using that live data to inform them about improving the city and real-time analytics and improving the urban environment, which sounds kind of okay if it's anonymized, but there's a fear that eventually this data won't be anonymized, of course. And he also says, this is a direct quote, that big data and AI should be used in prevention and prosecution of crime. And this sounds a little bit, this makes you a little bit nervous that we're going down this route. And so I'd like to introduce a kind of third category. I talked about how we can use the technologies of loss prevention to actually improve better customer experience. It's no longer the trade-off it was before. But I think the caveat we should always be conscious of, and it's very, very crucial right now, particularly in the climate we're in with Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica scandal and all of that, the third metric we should always be thinking about is privacy. What is appropriate for our customers that is, maybe we can make the store more secure, maybe we can make their customer experience better, but not at the detriment of their privacy. We don't want to go down that route. Because eventually, we're going to see something like we're already seeing in China. This is not science fiction. This already exists. This is something called Zima credit or Sesame credit. It depends which part of China you're in. And basically, this is a social score that each citizen has who uses this app. And what it does is basically tracks your payments through Alipay. Basically, everyone does everything through Alipay, ordering an Uber, buying a coffee, whatever it is. And it scores you on your social responsibility as a human being. So if you spend more money in KFC than you do at Whole Foods, they'll rank you down because you're not very healthy. You'll probably find it harder to get good health insurance. If you get voted, right now in the US, we have our Uber ratings, right? If your Uber rating is low, that's going to affect your credit. If you spend your whole time playing video games, because they can track your use of technology versus out there in the world helping at a soup kitchen, for example, they can track that. And eventually, when we have facial recognition everywhere, we're going to get to a society potentially where everybody is tracked all of the time. And on one hand, this is a big thing for loss prevention because I'm going to be very unlikely to steal anything if I feel like I'm being tracked everywhere all the time. But on the flip side, it's slightly worrying because we get to this stage where everybody has a social score, a capital. It's moving into the space of the Black Mirror episode that many of you may have seen. I'm going to show a clip of in a second. This is happening right now. So if you buy cigarettes versus buying vegetables, your social score will go down. And we're already starting to see this play out, not just in a sort of score that maybe sounds a bit arbitrary and doesn't mean anything, but in China, they're already starting to talk about barring people from planes and trains who have a low social score, who are considered not good citizens. This should terrify us, in my view. And this sounds like I say, a science fiction thing, and maybe, oh, it's China, they're all doing this crazy stuff. Just yesterday, Uber announced plans to use your accelerometer in your phone to track when you're ordering an Uber after 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. If you're moving your phone around like this, typing badly, they'll be able to make a pretty good assumption about how drunk you are. And if you're drunk, they can allow Uber drivers to refuse your fare. So this is creeping in everywhere. It's not just facial recognition. There's lots of different ways they are creeping in and trying to understand what we're up to. And what I'm going to do now is play you a 2-minute video that shows you the far-reaching consequences where we might go, and then hopefully we'll have a couple of questions just about specifically LP. So thank you.
Hi there, how you doing?
I am wonderful.
I am so sorry. That flight is canceled.
No.
Customer incident at the other end.
What? So when is the next flight?
Yeah, they're all kind of full.
I booked this weeks ago. It's my best friend's wedding.
I'm sorry.
I have to get there. I have to.
Okay, let's see what we can do.
Oh, thank you.
I see there's one standby seat on another plane leaving tonight.
Oh, okay.
That's reserved for members of our Prime Flight program. You gotta be a 4.2 or over to qualify.
Oh, I'm a 4.2.
I'm afraid you're actually a 4.183.
Oh,
Well, that's not my fault. Some woman dinged me down in the couch. Can't you just...
I'm sorry, it won't let me book it without the correct ranking.
But it's so close.
There's just nothing I can do.
I mean, surely.
I'm gonna have to ask you to moderate your language then.
Sorry, it's just... I'm maid of honor. I cannot miss this wedding.
And I am so sorry about that.
Can you call the supervisor?
I cannot do that.
Can you just call the supervisor?
I cannot do that.
Call the supervisor.
Okay, that's profanity. We're zero tolerance on profanity.
I'm sorry, it's just...
Yeah, I have to serve the next customer.
No.
Step away, ma'am.
Just help me. I'm so sorry.
I've called security.
Oh, no, please don't do that. I'm a 5-star-ing you. 5 stars.
What's the issue here, Hannah?
Intimidation and profanity.
Oh, no, I was not intimidating.
Don't speak, ma'am.
I was just trying
Ma'am?
to...
Okay, so, in order to restore calm, I'm invoking my authority as airport security to dock you 1 full ranking point as a punitive measure. This is a temporary measure.
No!
The score reverts to normal in 24 hours.
No, but I
During
need
this
it
probationary
now.
Period, all down votes are subject to a ×2 multiplier.
×2?
We recommend you avoid negative feedback at this time.
I'm on double damage.
Please, remove yourself from the airport immediately.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage President and founder of Sageberry Consulting, Steve Dennis.
So, we've only got a couple minutes for questions. So, I guess one is there's an aspect of what you're presenting that kind of creates a bit of an Orwellian, potentially dystopian kind of future where all of our moves are being monitored. Is that, I guess, an accurate sense? And if so, what does that actually mean for loss prevention?
I mean, I was being a bit provocative towards the end, but just to make the point that this isn't actually such science fiction as we think. I mean, it's potentially there, and I think that's why that privacy piece is still really, really important to be conscious of. It's starting to happen in China, and where technology can be leveraged everywhere to start tracking all of our moves, whether it's our Uber, like I say, tracking how drunk we might be, it's a potentially very slippery slope that we should be careful of. I think what I'm trying to get at here is just to sort of point out that whilst I think technology and innovation are absolutely inextricably linked now, and we should be trying to think how we can leverage it better, the point really is that loss prevention has the technological tools and the technology that they should be thinking about how they can collaborate with other teams in terms of how you can use that technology you guys already have to actually potentially, like I say, move towards infrastructure that actually allows for a better experience.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that was in your presentation that I've seen people talk about before is the Amazon R&D investment and just their commitment to innovation. And when you see number, was it 23 billion or
23 billion.
Some number? So obviously, most folks here don't have quite that kind of money to spend.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you're dealing with much smaller budgets, what kind of advice do you have in terms of where to focus, how to get the most out of that kind of money?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you have to be led by your customers. And so that means, I mentioned before about, bunting and just trying to do it. You have to take some risks, but you can take risks in smart ways. And I mentioned that sometimes it's a problem doing beta tests in a few stores because it doesn't then inevitably get taken on. But if you can roll out technologies that are not about reinventing customer behavior, as in it just augments what they're already doing, then it will normally work.
Yeah.
That's the secret. And too many, we've seen it down the years where, I remember a bank in the UK that when the iPad was launched, just stuck iPads everywhere, but didn't think about how that was actually going to really do anything. And of course, customers don't want to learn new behaviors when they go into a store. And what I think is smart about a lot of the technologies I shared today is a lot of those technologies are happening almost without the customer almost being aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And so when you can do that, the customer won't react badly, and there's a pretty clear business case for what will probably work. You won't get it right all the time, but I think if you think like a customer and augment what they're already doing, then you'll find the route to success.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'll ask you a similar question I asked the panelists earlier about kind of separating the hype from the reality with so much going on. You pointed to quite a lot of different technologies. There's these up-and-coming companies putting new things out. What guidance do you give to clients to be able to tell what's really ready anytime soon, maybe worth experimenting with a little bit, all the way to, yeah, you got to jump on this and make sure you put it into practice?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I live in New York, and most of our clients are in major metropolitan cities, but I'm also conscious that a lot of our clients have thousands of stores, and when they ask to see the disruptive future of retail, they want actually something that they can actually, not just for a couple of flagships, but something they can actually scale. And so I think it comes back to this idea of understanding what actually improves the customer experience. And I think what I was trying to share today was it can be quite subtle, little ways, spotting when there's a line of people waiting for a checkout, how you can just do that. The customer's not even aware why there's suddenly a new checkout opening up, but it's being smart about how you use those technologies in subtle ways that have a pretty clear business case. I think those perhaps are the less sexy examples than, say, Amazon Go and all the ones that get a lot of press, but probably those are the ones that I think potentially have the most, certainly in the short and medium term, the best chance of actually making customers happier.
Sure. Okay. So we're up against our time. Maybe one last question is just the general one, which is if you had to give one general piece of advice to this audience in terms of what they could potentially take back and make happen, what might that be?
I think the key to what I'm trying to talk about today is collaboration. I think you guys actually, I don't really know loss prevention massively well, but I imagine you possibly sit in a sort of bunker as part of the business somewhere and you have your very specific remit. I think in the future, where we're seeing the blurring of the lines between categories and the blurring lines between channels, these days online and offline are not just a website and a store. There's this gray area in the middle where it's all about context. All the lines across everything in retail are blurring. And so I think that means that you guys need to start collaborating, bringing your experience and your expertise to bear with other teams, and they will value you for it. And like I said in that presentation, I do think actually you guys could potentially be the heroes. No longer think of the technology team as the IT team. Think of them as driving something that can drive the business forward.
Excellent. Well, hopefully those are a real charge and inspiration for the audience. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. And I think we're coming up on a break. Let's give James a round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our session.